I want to talk now to our principal aviation analyst, John Nance. We've talked to John several times today. Remind me, John, you're also in Seattle, right? Now, where are you?
That's correct. Tacoma, actually.
You're in Tacoma, in Washington, which I think is your home, as I recall. And I've seen subsequent reporting today which confirms that which you were so eloquent about this morning, or so particular about this morning, that it is not very difficult to fly a 757 or a 767, or at least on the short-term basis to get an aircraft directed where you want it to do, even if you're a rank amateur. Can you go through that again for us?
Yes. I missed the last part of the question.
Well, just how,
Peter, I'm sorry.
I apologize, windy question, but that it is possible, without a great deal of experience, to get a 757 or a 767 to go where you want it to go, even if you're an amateur, if you're going to go a short distance, that these are basically easy and similar aircraft to fly.
Once it's in the air, that's correct. However, when you take a look at the picture of the 767 going into the building there in the World Trade Center, Peter, what you see is an aircraft that's in a bank that's being manipulated rather deftly to get it right on target. And the fact that we had both these airplanes hit on target suggests to me that we had fairly experienced pilots of one sort or another in that terrorist group at the controls of that airplane. But is it possible that they could be more amateurish and just guiding it maybe with the experience only in a single engine aircraft? Yes, it is within the realm of possibility.
I think I heard one airline captain say today that with 3 or 4 months experience only, you could actually get a license which would qualify you to fly one of these aircraft, or at least, as he said, it's very, very easy to aim the plane.
It is, if you've had some experience on the controls. It does not feel like a small single-engine aircraft, so there is a bit of a difference there. But I think what I would come back to is this, that if somebody were planning to do this, and obviously somebody planned very well, they're not going to want to take a chance that maybe somebody isn't going to, the person at the controls that they put there, their terrorist, is not going to hit the building. They're going to want some training, and that's where I think we can probably follow that string. There's something else that, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about that you brought up a little while ago, and I thought it was very interesting. You're talking about Flight 93 and the question about why it went down there in Pennsylvania and that we don't know the cause. And the fact that, of course, the government says, the military says tonight that they did not shoot it down. There are still two possibilities, and we don't really have a clear track on this. One, the Associated Press reported several hours ago that in one of the cell phone calls from that airplane, from a passenger, the passenger was talking about the circumstances of the hijacking, and at a certain point he said, wait a minute, there's a puff of smoke out on one of the wings, or a puff of white smoke, and then he said, we're going down. Exactly what sequence that's in, I don't know, but apparently that call was made to a 911 center, and I assume that we'll be able to get that later on. Now, if that's true, that's a very great puzzle, Peter, because there is nothing that you can do in the cockpit that's going to create a puff of smoke on the wing, and that raises the possibility of some outside force, i.e. a fighter shooting at it. By the same token, we have this as the only one of the 4 airplanes that made a sudden turn and requested a change in direction. The other 3, according to Lisa, we don't have any information that they made any request of air traffic control. The 4th one did. And that would indicate possibly, it could have been one of the hijackers, but it indicates possibly that one of the pilots was allowed to stay functional long enough to agree to take the plane back to Washington. He would not have had any idea what they were going to do or wherever it was headed, and that at some point in time that still remaining pilot or pilots got into a fight, and that could have led, very much as in Egypt Air, to a tussle in the cockpit which lost control. So we've got really a dichotomy.
Just remind people about Egypt Air. There's a long debate about whether Egypt Air crashed as the willful act of a pilot. Was there a struggle on board with the Egyptian pilot trying to force the aircraft down, other people trying to resist? It is possible that in every instance today there was a struggle in the cockpit before someone got their hands on the controls and went directly for their targets.
And I think I'm not only echoing my own feelings, but also that of the NTSB when I say that the Egyptian government, to the contrary notwithstanding, there really is no other scenario whatsoever that fits the Egypt Air disaster of over a year ago, except that the first officer intended to put that airplane into the water, and ultimately, despite the efforts of the captain to stop him, succeeded.
Now, in terms of access to the cockpit today, it is just, you know, we all get on airplanes and we go over, and we now know that in this age, the cockpit door is always locked. The stewardess goes up and has a code, knocks 2 or 3 times, or whatever she does, sometimes has a punch-in security code in order to get the door opened. Not not difficult to bust through that door, though, if you're determined enough.
No, it isn't difficult, Peter, and the reason that it isn't is because if we made that door too sturdy and we ended up with a rapid decompression, it would cause structural problems to the airplane. As a matter of fact, in some of the doors in some of the aircraft, like 737s, there are actually pressure blowout panels on the door that would respond to a pressure change. And those could be, in certain circumstances, removed more easily than we'd like. You can't put a bank vault door up there. Part of the problem is simply the pressure vessel of the aircraft. So a determined individual is going to be able to get through that door. And we've had two instances, as a matter of fact, in the past number of years where big burly people, both of them deranged in one form or another, broke through just with the force of their own body. I think both of those instances were in 737s.
John, you have worked so many investigations for us over the years, and you have the added advantage that few people do of being a commercial airline pilot and know what it's like in the cockpit. And in so many instances, we've actually resolved the issue of what has happened. Ultimately, we've learned what we really believe happened. What's your instinct about today? Are we ever going to learn what really happened on board those airplanes?
Peter, I think we will, at least in 2 of the 4 cases. I think the one in Pennsylvania is going to yield the voice recorder and the cockpit, or the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder rather easily, given the confined condition of the crash site. I think because of the Pentagon situation, we will find those recorders as well. There is so much debris on the World Trade Center site. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be simply fortuitous if those recorders are recovered anytime soon. I think eventually they will be, but probably not soon. And when they are, they're able to withstand a tremendous amount of force and heat and all sorts of disastrous impacts. So I would say that we probably eventually will know precisely what went on in terms of voice in that cockpit
and
in all 4 cases.
I apologize for the interruption. Does this apply to the cockpit voice recorder or just to the black box recorder which records the mechanical goings-on of the aircraft?
Both, actually. They're both in the same location. They're powered the same way. They are in 2 separate orange boxes in the tail end of the airplane, and they both have the same degree of survivability.
That was the question I wanted to answer. The cockpit voice recorder does have the same degree of survivability as do the black boxes, which have time and again revealed information about tragedies in the air.
Not only that, Peter, but some of the later models are actually solid state. They don't even have any moving parts, and they can withstand, I believe it's up to 800 G-forces.
Okay. John, anything you want to add at this particular point?
Well, I guess one thing that's probably a little bit out of the area of expertise, but just to echo some of the other things that have been said today, you know, this is an attack on the United States, but it's also an attack on humanity. I feel this very greatly in several different veins, not only as a citizen, but as an Air Force officer, a reservist, and certainly as a member of the airline community, which has been so sorely represented in this fiasco. And I guess one other thing, if you'll permit me, Peter, and that was about the comments that we've made in regard to security. This is something that a lot of us have known about and quite frankly been very upset about for a long time, is that if we're going to have screening in our airports, and we're going to make the pretense that this is going to be a useful thing, and we don't know whether or not they got through this screening or they plan to go through it or not. We don't know whether there was a failure or if this is simply the system. But we need to have federal employees, in my opinion, not scattered bunches of employees working for different airlines who are paying bottom dollar. We need a standardized, well-trained federal force of people. If we're going to do it, we need to standardize it nationwide. And this has really been, and I'm sorry, but I have to use the word, an absurd excuse for a system for a long time. That's without reference to whether or not that had anything to do with today's terrorist attacks. In other words, whether people got past that system or not.
John Nance, thank you very much. It is very difficult. Thank you very much, John. It is just simply difficult and very much out of the ordinary for commentators, analysts, reporters to step outside the roles they have to and do on occasions like this. And I think John Nance speaks for a great many people who are covering this story today or having to analyze the various dimensions of it. You want to stand outside it and be a human being for just a moment and say what you feel about this, and our jobs do tend to mitigate against that.